las 3:30 p.m. April 13th, 2021. The Gulf of Mexico. 19 offshore workers are about to make the most terrifying decision of their lives. In less than 30 minutes, their 175-foot liftboat will be lying on its side in the churning waters, and 13 of them will never be seen again. This is what really happened in those final, desperate moments. The Seacor Power departed Port Fortune, Louisiana, just after noon on April 13, 2021, carrying 19 experienced offshore workers on what should have been a routine 18-hour voyage to an oil platform in the Gulf. At 7:02 a.m. that morning, the crew received a weather report predicting benign conditions. Winds of just 9 to 12 knots from the southeast, with 3-foot seas. The vessel itself was a maritime workhorse, a 175-foot self-elevating lift boat designed to plant its 3 massive legs into the seafloor and lift its hull above the waves. Captain David Ledet, a seasoned mariner, commanded a crew that included fathers, brothers, and sons, men like Daspit from Lafayette, and crane operator James Wallingsford from Gilbert, Louisiana. But Mother Nature had other plans. By 3:30 p.m., a squall was passing over the Seacor Power as it transited the open waters of the Gulf, with visibility dropping and winds increasing significantly. What happened next would become one of the most devastating maritime disasters in recent Gulf history. For the first 3.5 hours, everything proceeded normally. The Seacor Power churned through the Gulf at its typical 4-knot speed, following the same route countless other vessels had taken to service the sprawling network of oil platforms dotting the horizon. But at about 3:30 p.m., as the vessel transited the open waters of the Gulf, a squall passed over the liftboat. What the morning weather report hadn't predicted was the development of an intense, fast-moving thunderstorm system. The kind that can turn the Gulf from a mill pond into a washing machine in minutes. The crew faced a critical decision. In worsening visibility and rapidly increasing winds, they could either push through to their destination or implement emergency protocols. With visibility dropping and winds increasing significantly, the crew decided to lower the Seacor Power S legs, essentially transforming from a moving vessel into a stationary platform anchored by its massive steel legs. This is standard procedure for liftboats caught in severe weather. The legs would bite into the seafloor 50 feet below, lifting the hull above the wave action and creating a stable platform to ride out the storm. It's a maneuver these experienced crew members had performed dozens of times before. But what they were facing wasn't a typical Gulf squall. Unknown to the crew, vessel operators in the area were reporting heavy rain, winds exceeding 80 knots and 2 to 4-foot seas. 80-knot winds. That's nearly 100 miles per hour, the equivalent of a Category 2 hurricane. And it had developed in a matter of minutes, giving no one time to seek proper shelter. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. As the crew began lowering the vessel's legs, the storm intensified beyond anything in the morning forecast. The ship's mate turned the boat into the wind in an attempt to slow it down. But as it turned, it led over. This is where maritime physics becomes deadly. A lift boat with its legs partially extended is in its most vulnerable position. No longer stable as a floating vessel, but not yet secured as a platform. Before the turn was completed, the liftboat heeled to starboard and capsized. The NTSB determined that severe thunderstorm winds exceeded the vessel's operational wind speed limits, causing a loss of stability. In layman's terms, the 80-knot winds hid the Seacor Power's superstructure like a giant sail, creating a massive lever arm that simply rolled the vessel over. The capsizing happened so fast that most of the 19 crew members had no time to don survival equipment or deploy life rafts. Several people were able to escape onto the exposed port side of the deckhouse, essentially climbing onto what had become the vessel's new roof as it lay on its side in the churning waters. But rescue would prove nearly impossible. Search and rescue efforts were hampered by 30 to 40-knot winds and seas that quickly built to 10 to 12 feet and persisted throughout the evening. The Coast Guard launched one of the largest search and rescue operations in Gulf history. Rescue attempts resulted in 6 successful rescues, 1 each by 2 United States Coast Guard ships and 4 by civilian vessels. Good Samaritan vessels in the area, despite the dangerous conditions, managed to pull for survivors from the water. But for 13 families, the nightmare was just beginning. Two crew members were identified as 55-year-old James Wallingsford of Gilbert, Louisiana, and Anthony Hartford, 53, of New Orleans. Found in the portside engine room of the boat, James Wallingsford was a crane operator and father of one of the experienced hands who kept Gulf operations running. The search continued for days, with families camping at the dock, refusing to leave. Private vessels joined the effort, including the United Cajun Navy. Scott Daspit, the father of missing crew member Dylan Daspit of Lafayette, established Gulf Coast humanitarian efforts. After the United Cajun Navy pulled out of the search for survivors was called off by the Coast Guard on April 19, 2021. 6 agonizing days after the capsized, but families refused to give up hope. The investigation revealed disturbing gaps. Despite being in 2021, the NTSB found that crew members were not equipped with personal locator beacons, devices that could have transmitted their exact locations to rescue teams even in the worst conditions. Here is what haunts investigators and families to this day. Of the 19 crewmen aboard the Seacor Power, only 6 came home. 7 more were never found, but presumed dead. 7 men simply vanished into the Gulf of Mexico. Among the dead was the boat's captain, David Ledet, a man who had navigated these waters for decades. If someone of his experience couldn't survive what happened that day, what does that tell us about the true ferocity of the storm that struck? The NTSB's final report revealed something chilling. The weather report emailed to the vessel at 7:02 a.m. predicted afternoon winds at 9 to 12 knots, but by afternoon, winds exceeded 80 knots. That is not a forecasting error. That is a complete failure of the weather prediction systems that offshore workers depend on with their lives. But here is the question that still keeps families awake at night. Where are the 7 who were never found? In water that's only 50 feet deep, with multiple dive operations and sonar searches, how do 7 men simply disappear? Some maritime experts believe the men may have been trapped inside air pockets within the vessel, surviving for hours or even days before. Well, before the unthinkable happened, others theorized that the violent currents could have carried boaties far from the capsizing site. 3 years later, 7 families still don't have answers. 7 chairs remain empty at dinner tables. 7 bedrooms remain exactly as they were left on the morning of April 13, 2021. Seacor Power lies in 50 feet of water tomb for some, and a daily reminder that the Gulf of Mexico keeps its secrets. Those 7 missing men didn't just vanish. They became part of a maritime mystery that may never be solved. But their families haven't given up. They're still searching, still hoping, still asking the same question that should haunt all of us. In an age of GPS, sonar, and satellite technology, how do 7 people simply disappear without a trace? But here's what you can do right now. Something that could save lives. The families of the Seacor Power victims discovered that better safety equipment could have prevented this tragedy. Personal locator beacons devices that cost less than $300 could have guided rescuers directly to each crew member, even in those 80-knot winds and 12-foot seas. If you know someone who works offshore, a father, brother, son, or friend, send them this video. Share it on every platform you have. Because right now, today, there are offshore workers heading out to the Gulf without personal locator beacons, trusting outdated weather reports, working on vessels that aren't required to carry the life-saving technology that exists. The Jason's Beacon Foundation, named after one of the victims, is fighting to make personal locator beacons mandatory for all offshore workers. But they need your voice. Here's your mission. Comment below with the name of your state, and I'll pin the contact information for your representatives who can vote on offshore safety legislation. C-A-L-L-M. One phone call from you could be the difference between another family getting closure and another 7 empty chairs at Christmas dinner. The families of the Seacor Power can't bring back their loved ones, but together, we can make sure this never happens again. The question is on what happened to those 7 missing men. The question is, what are you going to do to prevent the next 7? Subscribe if you believe that no family should have to wonder where their loved one disappeared to. Ring that notification bell, because every subscriber helps us reach more people who can make a difference. And share this story, because somewhere out there is an offshore worker whose life you might just save. The Gulf keeps its secrets, but it doesn't have to keep taking our people.